I'm gonna hit record, and what we can do is a quick 30 seconds, just a reflection from everyone. Like if there's anything specific that you'd like to gain from the reputation conversation, I think that'll help me shape the conversation today. Yeah, so let's go. Let's start with you, Alexander, alphabetically, and then you can call on the next person.
I think the most interesting thing for me is how it's possible for users to change what they want to use as their reputation, so that some groups might adjust what reputation actually means and how it's being interpreted. So there's the storing of the reputation, but then the interpreting of it and how those two flow together and can be adjusted.
Can you call on someone?
Phil.
Yeah, same as Alexander. I'd like to see that because reputation is extremely contextual. So reputation to an individual is different to a group, and in different situations, the same group may have different reputation interactions based on what's actually happening at that time or what's going to happen in the future, that sort of thing. So yeah, very complex. Let's go with Michael.
Well, yeah, kind of building on that, I think one thing I'm interested in is how you might transfer reputation between contexts. And like, if I'm known to be good at something by some group, how would another group find out about that? And how would they translate that over? And do they believe them? Do they think I'm credit worthy in a specific way? Or yeah, kind of how that translation might occur. Let's see, maybe Aryabhata.
Thank you. So actually, I'm also interested in seeing how the relationship, like what do you say the life cycle of a recommendation is? For example, does recommendation translate into recommendations, and that's the natural outcome of it? And how do you connect it in the pipeline? So what happens next with reputation as a currency?
Call on someone?
Call on Greg. Or maybe I'll go with Sol. He's driving. Greg is driving.
Solomon?
Yeah, hi.
Hey, you know, like, oh, can you hear me though?
Oh, not too well. Let's go with Solomon. Solomon, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, for me, I'm just curious how does reputation currency work in the context of agent-centric? And actually, I think it works very well in agent-centric, but so I'm just like to know more how it works in practice. Thank you.
And yeah, next person.
Hey, can you hear me now, Sid?
Yes, we can. Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Okay, so I was just thinking about this whole idea of like when you see your reputation and status within a network, if that can also identify like vulnerability. And thinking of terms of building resilient communities, right? So you can identify like unique choke points within a network or community if somebody has too unique of a reputation in a network. You see what I'm saying? So I thought that was an interesting thing to come up with and kind of see, and it kind of got sparked by the conversation about the death cycle with these apps and things like that. And I was like, oh, okay. And so somebody had a great comment about archiving your reputation, you know, as a respectful way of handling the digital reputation after death.
Yeah, can you explain that? What do you mean by like the conversation with the resilience though?
Oh, so it started getting to me to say, hey, if you start building your status within a network and you do it in a unique manner, then you become really like a vulnerability, right? So it'd be a way for you to kind of see your role in a network, and if it's too unique, then you become a liability within that.
Oh, okay.
And even if that's a platform, so think in an agricultural sense, if you can kind of see where your farm has one spot that one unique spot, and it doesn't have redundancy, things like that.
Interesting. Cool. Thanks. Since you can't see anyone, I'm gonna call on Bosby.
I'm just kind of observing. Sorry, I'm busy typing
Cool.
things. Yeah, other people have kind of covered the things I would have asked anyway.
Okay. Let's go with the other Sam then. Sam, we can't hear you. Maybe it isn't on. Okay, Kamal.
Hey Sid, hey everybody. I'm just here to watch, and I saw a little bit about your presentation in the Commons Engine course. So I'm just here to review and learn more.
Awesome. Cool.
There might be some unrelated things, or the sort of semi-related, that I could talk to at the end about how to link some of these sort of independent modules into a system. That's kind of the thing I'm thinking at the moment.
Cool. As a side note, I'm not sure if you're doing that right now, but Bosby is trying to integrate one of our likes modules into an economic event. So if that actually works over the next 40 minutes, we might actually try something. Let's see. Cool. And we have Armando. Armando's of the last year done some interesting work with Sacred Capital. He's done a bunch of modeling, like some of the things you guys spoke about, like these transfers between contexts. I prefer to call it bridging. We've used quite a few names like the interchange, staking, but I think bridging seems to be the most appropriate one right now. And so he can share like some of the stuff that we've tried to model as you bridge, and then how it breaks down, how reputation can get hijacked, diluted, like there's a whole bunch of cases, even echoing between, like when you bridge between contexts, you can end up with echoing, like, the same activity actually spiraling through networks and going out of control. So there's a bunch of situations there that he can cover based on how much time we have. So my sense is, if going through the questions.
Sid, just before we get started.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just show you something pretty?
Yeah. Are you showing us the ratings DNA?
No. Could you let me share screen?
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, literally, it's just pretty. It's kind of cool. Watch this.
That is kind of cool.
Yeah, so they're all DH2, all the nodes connected to all the other ones.
That is cool. And that is a nice logo actually for Chimera, in case you're looking for one. Awesome. So it feels like we want to start with a little more like an ideological conversation around reputation, rather than just jumping into some of the stuff that we built. I liked what Philip's spoken about, what Philip mentioned, that reputation is highly contextual. And so for anyone who's interested, like there's been a bunch of conversations we've had around how reputation gets designed wrong, or how it isn't the same as money. And so there's, what we said were these 4 tenets. So it's endogenous, like if reputation is associated with identity, like you can't transfer it among people. It's contextual. So if I have good driving skills, it only translates as driving skills, or maybe something else related to hand-eye coordination, like you can't use it to translate into like how trustworthy you are as a person, for example. It's multi-dimensional. So Michael, I think you was it you or was it someone else who brought up like you don't want to, like one of the ways reputation gets done really badly is this very gamey monolithic way, like hey, I like Philip such and such or this kind of a person, and that badge is what defines that person. And it's, I think it's the result of the way we've experienced reputations with systems today. Like if you're a criminal, like that's a tag that stays with you wherever you go, and there's no ability to break that down, there's no agency over it. So by multidimensional, I mean like there's no absolutism with reputation. Like it's a function of the context and what lens you're looking at it from, and I can share what that means. And it's non-zero sum. So like say we want to reward people in an ideation network with reputation, there's no limit to the amount that we can reward. Like of course beyond a point it becomes meaningless if everyone gets 5 stars, but at least it's not like a function of a pot of gold sitting at the center that we're limited by. So yeah, these are 4 interesting rules. I'd say like if any of you guys have questions at any point, just jump in at this stage. Don't wait for me to stop and pause. So yeah, so this question of reputation being contextual, there's an interesting distinction we make. Let me pull up something we brought up in the AMA that we had done. So ideally, like how you perceive something should be a function of your context. And one of the strong distinctions we've made is, let's look at reputation as 2 forms. Like there's reputational data and then there's reputational scores, right? So reputational data would be things like timestamps, like they could be objective reputational data types, like timestamps if you fulfill like deliveries or payments of any sorts, if you've been commenting in any way, if you've been like fulfilled any other intentions. So in an REA framework, it could be payments made or goods manufactured or timestamps. Or it could be more subjective data types. So it could be likes or claps, upwards, downwards. It could be emojis, like basically someone issuing some kind of validation towards you. So we call these reputational data, and every like data that's issued is linked to a particular context. So let's say we're a community that's manufacturing something, and Sid shows up on time every time with these timestamps. My reputational data is associated with this context. Now, within that context, we can actually issue and generate scores, which means like that community might say, hey, Sid, like these are Sid's timestamps, and we issue these badges to Sid, like as a certification of whether, you know, the fact that he's punctual or not punctual or whatever. And so in that context, there's reputational data, which is my timestamps, and there's scores, which is my badges associated with it. So when we're thinking about transferring within across contexts, or what I call bridging from one context to another, what we found is it's always easier to work with reputational data, right? Like when I, like, let's say I have a gold star rating or like, you know, gold badge in my manufacturing context because I show up on time every day. Let's say I show up in another community, the holochain dev community, like that badge is very little value to people because they, like, you don't necessarily, you can't break that down and figure out what's behind it. But what's really important is if I show up with my timestamps, like you let sense making occur in that new context on the basis of that data, right? So that new community might say, hey, Sid, these timestamps are relevant to us. We're willing to port these data, these bits of data into our community. And within that community, they might have their own score keeping system. Does that make sense? And I can share what that entails, what that means, and how we break that down. Michael, I think that like we'll build more on that because I think that's how the conversation of bridging or transferring between contexts develops. So where do we want to go from here? I think like what's really critical is this conversation of modularity, because I think why agent centricity plays really well with reputation is we can actually articulate different DHTs or DNAs for reputational data. So these likes and swipes that I mentioned here, um, each one of these can actually have their own DHTs or DNAs. And so instead you have a model where like every community might be using like specific technological tools, but they can also choose to have different reputational data types based on what their need is. So one of the things Sacred Capital has been doing, what we've been doing, is just designing and starting to spin off separate DHTs with each one of these reputational data types. So we actually created one like a likes DNA, like a separate DNA for reputational likes that anyone can call and use for their community. And that's something we can break down and go into right now. But the advantage of doing it is if you're a community, Alexander, this addresses your question, you don't have to be lumped with a specific reputation system. Like let's say you started out or built your stack with likes. For you to go back and actually change it to an upward downward system is like significant dev work. But if we build in a modular fashion, like you can actually swap out the likes DNA for the upward downward DNA. And that's the dream. Like that's what we'd like to move towards. So giving communities the ability to just swap in, swap out, move from claps to an upward downwards to comments DNA, like based on what's working for their community. And that I think is really cool because it lets communities specifically articulate their culture. And so again, this is something we've spoken about as part of the whole neighborhoods conversation, but like one of the advantages of agent centricity for me is that we can specifically articulate culture. Like that's what I mean when I say that. Whereas with like regular tech, like if you go to Facebook or a group or like any kind of chat platform, let's say, or even a Reddit, you have to buy into the culture that they've articulated, right? Like you might create your own subreddit, but you can't say, I don't like this upward downward thing. Like I want to just swap it out with, my own little reputation system, because it's so monolithic. But I think in agent centricity, we'll have the freedom to swap in, swap out. And that is a lot of fun. So getting into the actual conversation, so the actual architecture of it, you'd have a separate DNA for likes, for example. And based on those likes, you would have a separate DHT that computes a score on the basis of it. So that conversation of data versus score, like that fits in here. Like Sid might have like 10 different timestamps that's held in this DHT, but the actual certification or badge or label that's issued gets computed by this DHT. And the advantage of doing it in this modular way is this DHT that's computing the badge doesn't have to be limited to just one DNA. Like it can pull in from, I don't know, multiple contexts and multiple DNAs. And that's exciting.
Sid, can I ask
Yep,
something?
go ahead. Yeah, please jump in.
Why is it useful to have a DHT calculate the badge rather than making that something at the front end where it just uses the existing data and calculates it in real time?
That is a good question. I think the only reason, sorry?
There you go.
I actually don't have a very strong answer for that. Like, I actually think it's like there might be certain situations where like the validation that's created by a DHT might be useful. But honestly, like I think what's goal, like I said, is the data. So it's not necessarily the like the scores that are important. And secondly, like packaging it as DHTs would also allow us to plug in different computational modules. Like let's say you want to swap the badge for a certificate, or let's say like a star based rating, like then you have the freedom. But I don't know, possibly, do you have thoughts on that?
Just that I mean, they're kind of equivalent really, because they're both on the local machine, like it's all the local node doing the work. But with the holochain layer, you get shared validation rules, so you can make some guarantees about the way things check out and have other nodes cross-check and stuff. That'd be the difference from my perspective.
Like, I think if you're
And, you know,
worried about someone, claiming they have a gold star rating, even though they don't have the number of timestamps, something of that sort.
yeah,
But
and that's something holochain can guard against, because the DNA rules can say that, you know, this has to be the source chain that you calculate that from, and if the DNA hash matches, then you can validate that the calculations have been done honestly. But you can't do that if it's in the UI, because it's outside of that validation layer.
Yeah, but I think, Alexander, it's a fantastic point you bring up, because like it switches our mind to like, hey, reputation scores need to be calculated locally. And there's so many blockchain projects that are just obsessed with like this consensus based reputation score calculation. And I think that's just ridiculous. Like I think that is this hangover from the crypto world, where you treat badges and certifications like money, right? Like almost like they're objects. But that's the thing, like reputation is never like, it's never that like that solid. Like it's really fluid, and which is why we'd say score should always be calculated locally. Yeah, so this is why we've been proposing for this structure, which is your reputation data in one DHT, your reputation computations in another DHT. And Michael, like this is the super fun bits, which is, well, if you've got this structure going, why not use like multiple DHTs to calculate reputation scores? And so the question is, how do you do this in a way that's relevant? Like, let's say you enter a community of, I don't know, like coffee connoisseurs, and they want to import your data from all kinds of weird contexts. You should have agency over, what you want to port over into that. And so what we've suggested there is a reputation vault structure. And the reputation vault is basically, think of it as a little switchboard, which lets you have agency and control over which reputations you want to port over into that community. So let's say you show up in the coffee connoisseur community and they want to port your data from your job, or like a totally unrelated I don't know, DJ community. You can actually not give consent for that because you think it's not contextual. And so for those who are interested, like this is a conversation we're having right now. Like jump in, after the call, because we're pushing the reputation vault. And for me, like I think of the reputation vault as this dashboard. Like as you move through the distributed economy, like for you to have control over how you're showing up in different communities, like that's really critical, and that's agent centric in my opinion. And so let's say you show up in DNA1, and DNA1 wants to import reputation from DNA 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can actually say, no, I just think DNAs 3, 4, and 5 are relevant, not DNA 2, or maybe you don't have DNA 2, and so the reputation vault is that switchboard. So when people query in to you and want to know who you are, and or like let's say DNA 1 wants to find, like needs your information, like all they're bridging to is DNAs 3, 4, and 5. They're not bridging to DNA 2, and that's where like the reputation vault plays the role as a switchboard.
Yes.
There. Sorry. Yeah, I thought you might have questions, Philip, because there's a few holes in this.
So what I've been doing is I built a tagging system so you can tag any kind of entry, including instances of a DHT. And I'm going to use that as a way to filter what you would put into these kinds of things like advertising and reputation and stuff. It seems to work quite well. The other thing I want to say was in that other one, when you show the struct of the like, no need to record the timestamp or the author because they're actually in the meta. They're in the hash, the header anyway. And you shouldn't really store those in an entry because they're stored in the hash, in the header.
You mean in 2020, the RSM?
all in Rust.
Hmm.
If you ever look at the way I did the meta stuff, you can go and get the timestamps and author addresses and stuff out of the header.
Okay. I guess I will chat with you about this. And I feel like that brings up a lot of questions around the designs for most of our hackalongs, because I feel like this is a super common structure that we've been using. Possibly, I don't know. Do you have thoughts on this? Because this feels like,
yeah. So I'm looking at that, thinking none of that stuff you've got in the struct, I would put in the struct. So the way I've done it is I link from the base to the entry, and the entry has meta fields for the timestamp and the address already. So the only thing that y'all would actually store in the entry or in their like entry is the number of likes.
Wouldn't you also? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's flux on this stuff, like where there is going to be a feature where you can ask the node for the system time at some point, I think. And you can't do that yet. So you can't yet, like you can get the timestamp after you've written a record, but you can't get a timestamp and write it into a record because you can't actually pull it from the clock.
Yeah.
And for this, I don't think it matters because the timestamp doesn't need to be part of the uniqueness that makes the hash of the like unique. Like, you know, you liking a thing is you liking a thing, doesn't matter. But it does impact uniqueness with that kind of stuff. Like you tend to need to want to add some creation timestamp so that each like it or each record is actually different. Otherwise, that'll be the same record.
Yeah, I can show you. Yeah. Let me share. I'll show you how to do it. It's pretty easy. Skip that. Right. So yeah. So you do timestamp like this. So you can specify which entry you want. Do you want the first one, the last one, or a particular one? And then out of the header types, you can get the timestamp like that. And you can also get the address of who wrote it as well. The provenances.
The address of who gave it. What about, like, wouldn't you link the like to the base entry? Oh, sorry, wouldn't it be in the entry definition? Like just what the base, like what the like was going towards?
Yeah.
So the way, like this credit to Posby, like this is something he had thought of last year. But the way we thought of it is like we don't, like all of these likes or claps or whatever go towards a base entry. We don't define what that could be, but it's identified by some kind of unique ID, and that string is passed in our entry. It's passed as a string.
Yeah. That's what this is. So you're linking that like entry to an anchor or some description, whatever that may be, and that anchor comes in from the context of the thing that you have attached the likes to.
But what if it's in another DHT?
It is in another DHT. The likes are in their own DHT, completely separate. So if you want the likes from a particular entry, you just pass in the entry and get all the likes attached to that.
But can you link it to something in another DHT, or you're just passing the string?
You just pass in the string and get the result back.
Okay, got it.
That might be a worthwhile time to jump in and talk about modularity in indexing, if that's an interest, because I can see where you're not marrying here, because Philip's got like there's sort of two ways to reference stuff where you can just have an entry with a field that's got an ID of another entry and you're not actually linking to it, but you in the front end you know that that's the ID and you pull it. And I kind of have a mix in our system. Like a lot of relationships are built like that because I haven't needed the deeper linkage. But once you start needing to say, like, find me all the likes against this post, then you need that kind of indexing capability to start to be in HoloChain in order for it to be efficient.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be, in my system, that's another tag.
Yeah.
So that'll be an anchor for that particular entry that you're looking for, and then you just get all the links off that one.
I just want to jump in on this conversation, possibly, and Philip, can you expand a little bit more on the context? Where did the context go? That's what I think possibly is trying to say. Indexing is the context, right? If your likes is just being pulled in, then where is the context? Context has disappeared.
No, the context is the entry that you're trying to get all the likes.
The context of this would be just that link identifier. But I would assume that as things progress, we'll end up starting to have proper URI resolvers where an identifier for a record includes the DNA hash as well as the entry hash. And then you haven't lost that association.
You just described my tag system.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I like the tag system because I feel like one thing we've been thinking about is like giving the freedom to every, community to be able to tag something as potential reputational data, right? Like anything, like it could be, like I said, it could be a timestamp, it could be a comment. And is that what you're alluding to? Like,
yeah, so here we got, this is the tagging system. So we got, so this is a tag technically. It's attached to a couple of entries. But the entries are actually attached back as well. So, so this tag here, or this anchor, is linked to the, and they are linked back as well. And the great thing about the code for this is there isn't any. Oh, broke it.
So just explain that. Is techno in a is a tag you've come up with? Is it a DHT of its own? No.
No. It's just a piece of text. So it works like this. So this is my tag cloud. And that's counting the number of tags at a particular time shows up. And then the actual tags itself. So this is that list of tags. So all of the different anchors that have been in there. So I can add a new one, like, I don't know, make a new tag. Right. So that added in a new anchor and linked whatever this tag module was hanging off of. The thing it's linked to. So then when you go back here and you click on one of these ones, even though it just pops up like that at the moment, it will bring you back all of the entries from all the different DHTs that have been tagged with POP. And not only, it's not just the entries either, it's the entries and the entry types as well, because that may be all the different things. Maybe it's a comment, maybe it's a tab, maybe it's a post, maybe it's a file, whatever. And actually instances as well. So you can tag instances as well.
That is cool. All right, I'm going to, let's keep going. I'm gonna, there's a couple of issues I think are interesting that come up around bridging, which I think are worth chatting about maybe even right now.
Do you want to jump ahead to that? Talk about links and cross-DNA indexing first.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
I think it's worthwhile while
I've got him. Let's go there.
Let's share this. Has my screen coming up? It may take a little while. I just cloned a new Holo REA, so I've got one that's standalone. Doesn't have any because this one's got some other stuff going on at the moment. But I do. Oops. Let's go So I want to show a couple of things here. There's this Hygen node module that I've been using to template. And I've got a generator here for new cross-DNA indexes now. So I just want to show you how that works, because it's sort of the equivalent of Chimera in a CLI version. So I'm just going to make a new one in the observation DNA. And I haven't figured out how to do path parsing in there, so I'm answering the same question twice. So the foreign record, let's say that there's a likes record in another module that Sid's building here. And in the local DNA, it's economic event. So I want to have a remote index that associates an economic event in this DNA with likes in the other DNA and vice versa. So you can query between them both. And these are just metadata. And that's it. And it generates you these files here. And if I pull those open, where were they? HAPS observation zones likes. Just to show you what comes out the other side. So you get this underscore index pattern here. There's one in here for agreements already. They're another foreign record in a different zone. And you know, the zone JSON's pretty straightforward. The cargo toml, you'll notice it's pulling in the storage constants from the two data types that I've mentioned. This is part of the low-level modularity that I'm doing in Modularity to try and split up all the core crates as much as possible so that there's cohesion and references between everything. So then when I look in the source here, this is kind of the main file. And you can see there's not a lot in it. There's a couple of to-dos here for things that you would want to replace. So for these here, you're talking about what are the names in terms of the holochain links between for the references between the two. So I might call this economic event liked by or something. And there's the type and the tag thing there, of course, as with all links in holochain. And then you've got some reverse links coming from likes in the other way. And then this is all it needs to be in the end. So it's been interesting reflecting on starting to pull links out and treat them, or indexes, because you know there's multiple links involved here, but to treat them as their own first-class citizens in holochain rather than kind of having an entry-centric mentality like I have done. So previously, you know, similar link structures that reference processes in the observation DNA with commitments and intents in a planning DNA. And at the moment, process kind of has all the link definitions within itself because it's sort of seen as being the central entity within observation. But when you take all the stuff that talks between processes and commitments and intents and pull it out, you get this kind of arrangement where now I have this index zone and everything to do with the index is contained within here. So in here, I define that there's this like base entry, which doesn't actually, there's no likes in this DNA. There's just a base link for the likes that points to somewhere external. And I take the responsibility in this module of defining both directions of the link. So this module says that there's some incoming link coming from the events, which are in this other event DNA zone within the same DNA here into the likes. And there's also ones going out from the likes to the event sort of thing.
Can I just ask you a question there? Do you understand the difference between to and from, what that actually does?
Yeah, it's like an alias difference underneath, isn't it? There's nothing much different.
No, all it does is specify which entry is the one that does the link validation. It's not a directional thing. You don't need to have to and from to have to and from links.
But if I wanted, would I have to have the same link type if I wanted it to be kind of like a single bidirectional thing? Because I have a different.
Also, wouldn't it affect the querying?
No.
Like what you can query?
No. All it means is that if you have a link to, and you do that your link is from one entry to another one, the validation executes on the to. If you have exactly the same link, but it's now the from one, all that happens is the validation executes on the from. That's all it does. It doesn't, there's no direction in the links.
But
it's confusing.
But my understanding was like when we're querying, you can only go from the base, right? Like, isn't that the still? Yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't stop you having a link. So the one that you've got in the to, that can still be a from back to the other one, right? And then you can link it. You get exactly the same result. It's just the to and from just specifies who does the validation of the link.
Yeah.
That's all it does.
I think
So
I still
simplify.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily want to, because it has extra semantic meaning for us. Like just looking at this one between agreement and event, which is a real one that I've already implemented. Like from agreement to event, you're talking about this idea of the events that are part of the agreement. But
so what happens there is that agreement is the one that executes the validation. Doesn't do anything else.
Yeah, sure. But the key thing is that from the events to the agreement, I'm actually talking about this event is a realization of this agreement. And so it has a different semantic meaning. So I kind of want a different link in there. I don't want to just be saying, find me the event where the event is one of the agreements.
As long as there's another reason for you doing it. I wanted to make sure you understood that you don't have to specify the direction of the link to get the link. That just specifies the validation.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So, and the other thing to note about this is that there's like a core, well, I say core, it's this helper library that I've been slowly adding to as needed. But yeah, a helper method here that handles the synchronization between the two DNAs. So this all lies in the origin DNAs, what I'm calling it, like the one that drives the operation. And if you go and look in economic event here, actually no, it'll be in the core. So it'll be in here or here. The only other things aside from that sort of separate indexome that's needed to hold the data, then you actually need to drive it. So I'm in the wrong code base on the wrong branch, sorry. So you can see in here that when you're creating an economic event, there's a realization of field that gets pulled out here and another helper here, which basically drives the cross DNA call. So this is the observation DNA asking the agreement DNA to please update me in index and associate this event with the agreement. So that's kind of the relationship between the two. And there's similar calls in here for update and delete as well that really are just using more or less the same helper with a different CRUD kind of verb. And I'll just show there's a pull request. It's not quite finished yet, but I opened it just to kind of make this stuff visible. So I'll send that through the chat as well, because it's just kind of quite clear and useful to see it all together, showing what is needed to add a new foreign key index and bunch of search and how it all wires together. Yeah, I think that's that topic. If anyone has questions before we keep going.
So quickly, possibly being a non-developer, what you just did, like at the beginning, like for like just typing, and then that's how you just created your reputation module, right? That's what you did. Just okay, awesome.
Yeah. I created I created an index between some existing records and the likes module that's part of a reputation module. So those two things already existing, but there was no query capability between the two, and that was what that was generating.
Cool. Do some of the people who raised questions about reputation, do you feel like they've been answered? We could dive into some of the depths of that. Like, I think some of the stuff about bridging and transferring between contexts is a very complex aspect for multiple reasons, and I can share some of that. Anything else that anyone is interested in going into?
Oh, Yeah, actually, can we even build upon the same thing that we were discussing about the modularity, like at the agent-centric level as well as the context level?
Mm, which one do you mean? The
Uh,
the difference between reputation data and reputation scores?
yeah, something like that. Or maybe how, like for example, what Posby and Philip are doing, like in like the code, how does it look like? So how they work. So if they can expand on that in the code terms, like how the scoring and that works. So just to understand.
I don't think POSPI has anything going with respect to reputation scores, right? Like you're not issuing any certifications or badges as of now, right? Yeah, not at all. So it's
No,
so that.
I could, I could talk a little bit about how, because I have an open issue, just kind of toying with the possibility of maybe I want to pull the economic event inventory stuff out of the observation module. And I just think following that through is kind of the same process as to how you might wire up that kind of decomposition.
Mm. Yeah, can you actually share a bit about the economic event and observation thing, like even the current structure? Like I don't think too many people even like are too aware of that.
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to share screen again. There's, where is it? This one, further modularity of economic resource functionality. So there's these kind of two records here, economic resource and product batch isn't implemented yet, but if you look at the Hollow REA code base in, this stupid bar in the way, and look at, so yeah, observation. Wow, that does not need to be open. Yeah, so in the observation DNA here, there is these currently 6 zones in this branch. And so these are all the different bits of functionality that are being lumped into the same DNA here. And economic resource is where you do all your inventory management stuff. And this at the moment works very differently to Guillaume's mutual credit in that his doesn't ever store the balance, but mine stores the resource on every change. So there's kind of like a transactional thing happening there that's actually writing and changing single record into the DHT. But you know, there's an awareness that there's platforms, some of which don't need inventorying, like Hilo is one of them. They don't care about managing people's inventory. They just want to track loosely some flows of resources between people. And
Wait,
not worry
you only store the entry when it's queried, right? Or when it's run, like?
No, I store it every time an economic event gets logged that specifies an inventory resource. It updates that resource with the consequences of the event. So if the event is to consume 5 apples, then the resource needs to be updated and the balance decremented by 5, kind of thing. So you could split that off into its own totally separate DNA that does no longer talk to observation. And I think that's quite sensible. It's been an interesting progression because, you know, when we started all this work, we were working from a single monolithic system, and it's always been debatable as well. Should we split that off, or are we over modularizing? But what you get here if you split this out is, because of the way I've architected the updates, there's actually a fairly simple record interface here, this updatable trait that just defines a method where you're updating something with something else. And at the moment, that gets done in every update. So when you look at the economic event library code, probably, you'll see that, yeah, creating an event, creating the record there.
You're going to really like the new 2020 version, because there's no more send receive kind of idea. It's remote procedure calls. So when you're doing that update and inventory event, you can say, and this uses capabilities, you can say, right, update the inventory event, and that will happen on a specific agent. So that when somebody else goes to query the event and query the inventory, you do the same on that same node. That way, you know you've got the latest. You don't have to wait for eventual consistency.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing here is it opens up the facility to have different resource behaviors. So I can have a trait that says this is an REA resource module that deals with resources, and then leave the Zome to decide whatever logic it wants to how to actually run the inventorying stuff. And so this current pattern of the transaction will write the resource every time it changes is a really good one for kind of more low trust networks where you might want to detect a network fork and make people resolve a conflict if two different resource consumptions have happened simultaneously, say. But you may not always want that, and you may want things to just be more freeform where, you know, if someone's done a double spend, you just kind of resolve it as spending it twice and let the balance decrement into the negative. And so you could do that because you could create a different economic resource module that doesn't actually store the resources ever. And when you query the resources, rather than reading a resource from the DHT that's already been read, it would just find you all the events that ever touch that resource and run a MapReduce on them, basically, using the same exact helper that I was just pointing to in here. Because, you know, rather than running that update on every transaction once, it's easy enough to run it over an array for every single operation. So there's a way that you can kind of have your choice of transactionality then just by decomposing a little bit more. And I think that has some play into how different reputation modules might function differently, but sort of present the same data. That's about all for now.
Cool. I think we
There's
can.
a few other random thoughts here, but people
Yeah.
can see them on their own. Chuck it in the chat as well.
There's a few things, like maybe just to close, like since we're running up on time, I'd like to introduce, talk a little bit more about the bridging between contexts. And I've been super obsessed with this because I think it's really, really critical, especially for distributed environments. Like reputation data generated in one context, how can it actually translate into other contexts? Because if we actually crack that problem, it solves a bunch of things for agent-centric environments. So I'll share what are the kinds of issues that currently are the problem. Philip, since you're on, I'd love to hear your perspective on bridging as well. The objective is to get, like I said, reputation data that you might have in other DNAs to be read by this DNA, right? And one of the biggest issues with that kind of bridging is this DNA doesn't ever have access to any kinds of warrants that might get issued in the other DNAs. And honestly, I think the only solution to that is if there are more than you only bridge to other DNAs where you have trusted agents also holding the DNA. So any kind of warrant issued actually can bleed through into your DNA. And I think that's super important. Apart from that, you don't almost never, you can't use any kind of validation logic in this DNA from other DNAs, because if there is if the validating node doesn't have access to all the DNAs involved, that validation will break. So it can't be used for validation rules as well. And so that's, yeah.
I'm not convinced about that. I think that needs to be tested.
But how? It doesn't make sense, right? Because we can't control which nodes are being gossiped to. And if those nodes don't have access to those DNAs or don't have those DNAs,
there are some things you can do, because you can actually inspect your local source chain to find the registered DNAs and then check the hash of the DNA. It's an awful kind of way to work around to find that data at the moment.
Yeah,
I suspect 2020 might be easier, but you can. And then it's for the use case, I'm immediately looking at it for, I want to be able to run validations as to whether someone's allowed to be in a network based on whether they're in another network. And I think that's kind of fine to do, because you're calling that invalidate agent, which gets run at the start of every request. So if the DNA isn't bridged and present or the hash doesn't match, you just return false and reject it, so that you can't validate unless you've got the right DNA connected. I think that works okay.
But then you might get a situation where it's not validated by any other nodes on the DHT, right? Like, let's say you're the only one with access to those DHTs. Like it won't throw up errors, but then it's not good validation logic.
You're going to have to say more.
As in,
wouldn't you just invite? So you've got the person who creates, or whose reputation we're talking about, and they've got access to all other DNAs. And then you've got the person who's reading their reputation, and wouldn't you just invite them to become part of the other DHT?
Yeah, but there might be issues, Alex, when the other DHTs might be like closed off, like they might have like certain membership requirements, right? Like, and you can't assume that Alex can enter whatever DHTs I'm part of.
Maybe then that means the reputation from that is closed off.
Yeah, but if you're like, let's say you and I are on a DHT, like it's called DNA1, and I'm using, like, the validation logic is asking me to bridge into DNAs 2, 3, and 4, and I'm part of 2, 3, and 4. Let's say you don't have DNA 2, 3, and 4. You can't validate that what I'm doing is accurate, right?
That's right. But that means for me, as the person who's analyzing your reputation, either I say it's not relevant for me because I haven't got access to these other DNAs, or I work to get access because it is relevant, and I do whatever necessary to
so that's what I agree with. Like, I think that's what we have to keep in mind while bridging. But the point is, like, when we validate entries, like Holochain will just try and gossip with all kinds of nodes. And so you might have a situation where Holochain gossips to nodes that only have DNA1, and all those nodes will say, like, we have no idea. Like, we don't have DNAs 2, 3, and 4. And so we can't really validate it. And so that's fine. Like, it may not throw up errors, but I might get away with doing incorrect things. That's what I was suggesting. And you can't control it. Like, it's not deterministic. Yeah, Philip.
But you're not in that network yet. So you don't have any right to anyway, do you?
Yeah, and the way the validation works is that you can't do network calls. Right. The validation to validate has to be in the entry or the validation package. That's it. Because you can't guarantee that anything else is available. All you've got is the entry. And you don't know when you got that entry, right? That entry, you may have had your computer off for 6 months, you turn it on, you get gossip, right? So the only way you can do validation is with the entry on the validation package.
Yeah, and there's something that needs to be teased out with the way that GM's been doing attestations in the mutual creditor, because I think that same kind of public broadcast that anchors some hashes so that everybody's in agreement that, we've seen all of this network state. There might be something in there that gives us an ability, like there's sort of a separate issue here of all of the things I'm talking about may only work with like DNA properties that are hard coded to say these specific agent IDs. As soon as that starts becoming mutable over time and you start being able to invite more people, then it's like, am I looking at the latest version of the DNA that says that I'm invited? Or have I been invited and subsequently uninvited and I've just kind of rewound and not shown you that? So there sort of needs to be like some way of broadcasting that this is where we're up to, so that if the validation can say, are you up to that? You're not, then you're at a date and I'm going to not validate you yet. It's going to be complicated, but I think there might be some light in the clouds there somewhere.
So, Philip, if I understand it right, are you saying that are you saying it's safe to bridge for validations?
No. Absolutely not.
But we could bridge to just access data. Like, the way I look at it is like just bridging for basic reputation data, which could then be like either passed as an entry, like an actual certification or something of that sort, once you have access to that data. And ideally bridging to DNAs where everyone in the DNA shares that copy of it, or it's bridged through a trusted node.
What I'm thinking is you have to do this cross-DNA validation stuff. That goes into the entry or the validation package at the time that the entry is created.
But even then, like, let's say the entry is created, another node that's validating it and they don't have access to the DNA, like, what am I not getting?
That's exactly it. You don't have, none of the other nodes may have access to it. So you can't say that you need that as part of the validation. So whatever you were going to get from that bridging during the validation, you do that at the time of the entry creation.
Got it, yeah.
Because
Okay.
you've got it, right? And you put that in the entry then.
Yeah, yep. Yeah.
When you're talking about bridging here, are you talking about a UI bridging or actually DNA?
Across DNAs.
So what's the benefit of recreating data that already exists in one DNA by putting that into the reputation vault? Maybe reputation vault is a DNA.
Yeah, the reputation vault is just a switchboard of sorts. Like, it's directing which DNAs an agent has given consent to. Like, it's not replicating the data per se, or at least that's not the intention right now.
So where is the data being replicated?
On the DNA that's calling for this information.
And what's the reason for that? What do you want to achieve with that?
Like, let's say let's say I have a community and I want to, like, this is an example Armando's been working on, like ride sharing. Like, let's say there's a bunch of different cooperatives of ride sharing networks, and there's a concept of a safety flag. Like, let's say you behaved inappropriately in one community, but that negative action should ripple across whatever other ride sharing networks you're part of, right? And so those communities should have access to that flag that is generated in one context. And so let's say you joined POSPI's ride sharing network and you said, like, here's access to my red flag data across 10 different ride share collectives. That's the context, like that. So basically, for you to be able to read data from different contexts. Does that make sense? Like, that's why we're even talking about this. Like, and so what that then, the importance of that is, like, you don't have to be a big rideshare cooperative yourself in order to ensure safety. Like, you can actually be a small micro collective of 10 people and still guarantee safety to your participants.
Yeah, and so what I'm saying is that instead of doing that check at the validation stage of an entry of, like, make a booking, you need to get that you need to get that reputation. When I do the booking, I've got access to those other networks that I'm part of. I can then retrieve that validation or that that reputation data at that time, and that goes into either the entry or probably a new type of validation package at some point in the future.
But so Alex's question is, will we actually write that data to this new DHT, or just read it or just compute some kind of pass entry? And and I think we could just like create a pass, like some kind of certification, which says,
because at the moment the validation packages are entry, chain, and full chain, right? We're probably going to need another one to say, multi-chain or something like that. That says, here's the validation package that goes with the entry, so that you don't have to keep storing all that stuff. But when the gossip goes around, a node that has no access to my other entries can validate against the validation package.
Yeah, I guess in my head, everything around reputation is totally user-centric. What I might find an acceptable behavior might be different to what someone else finds an acceptable behavior. And so I think badges and certificates aren't actually that relevant, because I want to interpret the data based on what I care about.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly it. Like, so what we're saying here is, let's say Postbe's rideshare community, like they will propose what data is relevant to their community and create some kind of score or certification around it, or some kind of entry membranes around it. When you join Postbe's community, you have that agency over what you'd like to port. Like maybe Postbe is asking for completely non-contextual information or personal information that you don't think is relevant, and you might choose to not share it. Of course, that might come at a cost to you. Like, let's say you have been a bad actor in some networks, and that might hurt you because you're showing up in Postbe's network as a stranger with no context, and no one's going to want to interact with you. But let's say you have been, you do have like a decent track record, and you expose that data, like people will have more information to interact with you.
Yeah.
I don't know if Armando's still on, but like some of the stuff that he's gotten into is really interesting. Like some of the issues that come up when you start bridging. So he's done this case of is he still on? No, I think he's dropped off. This case of
I
like this.
have to jump in about 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll just wrap up in a minute. Like one of these is a journalist network, and like if they're trying to create some kind of reputation for like high quality journalism, but if they bridge in from like a really spammy network, how their culture gets diluted. There's another bunch of examples around like what a wellness network might like to bridge from, so people don't game their Fitbit data. There's the safety example. There's a bunch of things that he's been doing, which maybe we could cover in another session now that I think about it. Yeah, that's what we've been up to. Cool.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks guys.
I might just do a final screen share before we go as a sneak preview of next time maybe.
I'm really liking the emergent nature of these patterns that we're coming up with. This is looking really good.
You know it's the right pattern when it's created by accident, huh?
Or when I've just spent the last day deleting like shitloads of code because I was like, hey, this is a much better pattern. It's been great.
Yeah, I just was running through earlier, just throwing some rough integrations of SID's likes module into HoloREA just to show what adding third-party behavior into some of the GraphQL dynamic runtime pluggable stuff that I was showing last week or the week before is. So yeah, it's fairly straightforward. This is all, none of this works. I realize I've still got bits in my code that I need to add, but this is what I'd like to happen. So essentially, there's this map zone function that we talked about last time, and I can pull that in from my module and use it to create a DNA mapping that talks to the like module that I've compiled. And then when I run the GraphQL builder, I can also give it some extension schemas. So there's a like type, and I'm just stitching it into economic event to say that all events can be liked, basically. And then you can stick in extension resolvers as well. So this is just the part that would allow you to query the likes off an economic event, basically by passing the event ID as the base entry into the likes DNA and pulling it out. So that's what it all ends up looking like. And once you've got that, then you can run a GraphQL query that just asks for the likes on an economic event like that. Pretty simple and declarative.
Boom. Let's actually do something in the next couple of days, possibly, if you got time. Like, I'd love to play with it. I'm also interested with GM's mutual credit, like for the credit limit to fluctuate as a function of reputation. Like that'd be cool. Like a reputation backed mutual credit currency.
Yeah, I gotta go. I'll catch you guys next week. This is looking really cool.
Cool guys. Thanks for this. Look forward to more.